before the opening prayer. 453. We will sing all three verses. I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, very deeply sank within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry. From the waters lifted me, now safe am I. Love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me. All my heart to Him I give, ever to Him I cling. In His blessed presence live, ever His praises sing. Love so mighty and so true merits my soul's best song. Faithful, loving service to Him belong. Love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me. Souls in danger look above, Jesus completely saves. He will lift you by His love out of the angry waves. He's the master of the sea, billows His will obey. He, your Savior, wants to be saved today. Love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me.
If you'll please bow with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we just want to thank You for this wonderful and glorious day that You've given us, yet another opportunity to live our lives in an ever-continual prayer to You, an ever-continual praise of You. We just ask that You please guide our minds and our thoughts and our hearts and our souls as we unite together in worship of You. And just please bless us all in everything we do to further Your kingdom. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
If you are using your hymnal, mark in your book 922, 922. That will be the song of invitation. Then turn to 313. 313, please. If you don't mind singing, all please stand while we sing Old Rugged Cross. On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross, where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain.
I think that most people enjoy laughing. I think that most people like comedy. I was listening to a podcast not long ago regarding Stephen Colbert, and the observation by one person that was talking about a particular subject said that he is a master at satire. How many of you have seen his show that I think it was on Comedy Central, the Colbert Report? Notice I said rapport. The reason that he's considered a master is because there are those that would watch that television show, and it was a satirical news kind of show, and it didn't matter if they were, politically and socially liberal or conservative. Both sides thought that Stephen Colbert was on their side. Now, some people saw through that, but even those that saw through that still laughed because he was kind of preaching what they believed in one way or another. The conservatives would listen to him and hear his comedic approach regarding just the absurdity of the liberals. And then the liberals would listen to him and say he's obviously mocking conservatives, which, by the way, that's what he was doing. But either way, he was a master at it. Satire is a use of, and comedy in general is a use of human language that has the potential of driving home points. And it can be very powerful when used appropriately. Well, even when used inappropriately, it can be powerful. I would submit to you that even the Bible records instances where satire or sarcasm and so forth is used even for good or to stress a point regarding the absurdity of a particular error. If you would look at 1 Kings 18 for just a moment. Here's an example. 1 Kings chapter 18. This is Elijah on Mount Carmel confronting the false prophets of Baal. Let's go ahead and start at verse 25. 1 Kings 18, starting at verse 25. And notice the sarcasm that Elijah uses. And, I mean, it's tragic, but at the same time, it's humorous. It's demonstrating, again, the absurdity of these prophets and their false god. Now Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one bull for yourselves and prepare it first, for you are many, and call on the name of your God, but put no fire under it." So they took the bull which was given them, and they prepared it and called on the name of Baal from morning even till noon, saying, "O Baal, hear us." But there was no voice, no one answered. Then they leaped about the altar which they had made. And so it was at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is meditating, or he is busy, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is sleeping and must be awakened." He goes on to say that they cried aloud and cut themselves as was their custom. That's somewhat humorous and ridiculous in and of itself, isn't it? Cut themselves with knives and lances until blood gushed out on them. But what is Elijah doing? He is using sarcasm to demonstrate the absurdity of their false religion and their false god. It is comedic. Again, if it weren't so tragic, it would be very fun. But you have to admit, I mean, that's pretty funny. Wait a minute, maybe your God is taking a nap. Just cry out louder. Wake him up. Just wake him up. So we see the humor in that, don't we? We see that even God's people, and remember that Elijah is a prophet speaking by the direction of God, so God himself uses comedy and this type of language to drive home a point here and there. And this is not the only case. The Bible is filled with this. In fact, as we have journeyed through the book of Luke, and that's where we are again tonight, as we've journeyed through Luke, we've seen some scenarios that were rather comedic. I mean, they were rather funny. And we've pointed this out. And not to belittle serious situations, but you remember, for example, when Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem and he tells his disciples, listen, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to be betrayed into the hands of the Gentiles, I'm going to be mocked. See, that's a very serious subject, and he's talking about being killed. He's going to be murdered, and they immediately turn around and start asking him about who's going to sit on his right hand and who's going to sit on his left. I mean, it's just, they just didn't get it. And it's almost laughable, isn't it? Until we start examining it a little bit more. But now I want to turn our attention to the crucifixion. And this is certainly something that we don't typically view, and never should we view it as comedic. And yet that's exactly what some did. In fact, that's what Luke stresses, at least occasionally, in his account in Luke 23 of the crucifixion and the events surrounding it. So tonight, we're going to talk about the crucifixion, a tragic comedy. A tragic comedy. And maybe you're thinking at the outset, this is blasphemous. Listen, I'm not saying that it was comedic. I'm not saying that it was funny. And you'll see that as we move along tonight. I do want to make mention of this, incidentally. We've spent quite a bit of time in Luke, and I've enjoyed my personal studies. I don't know if you've gotten a thing out of what I've been telling you, but I've enjoyed my personal studies regarding this. I've found a lot of things that I'd never had seen before, including some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. But we have Adam to thank for this. I learned a while back that Adam's favorite book is the Gospel of Luke. And so I thought a while back, I think maybe I should preach some sermons from Luke. Adam had a good idea there. So you can thank him for this series of studies that we've been engaged in. Okay, so Luke 23. We'll just start really at verse 25. That's where we left off the last time we were together and talking about the events that are stated in Luke. And we focused our attention on the trials of Jesus and how they were a tragic miscarriage of justice. But in verse 25, chapter 23, verse 25, it concludes after Pilate has repeatedly attempted to let Jesus go. Remember that Pilate is convinced that he's not guilty of anything worthy of death. Herod had also acquitted him. The trials themselves of the Jews, of the Jewish leaders, they were such a miscarriage of justice that he should have been acquitted because of the unanimous vote of guilty. But ultimately, Pilate is convinced, just because of the pressure of the moment and the fact that he has a responsibility to keep peace in the city and the potential, I guess, of a riot or a revolt, he goes ahead and he allows them to take Jesus and crucify him. So verse 25 says, "And he," that is Pilate, "released to them the one they requested, that is Barabbas, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison, but he delivered Jesus to their will." That's where we left off last time. So we're going to take up in the next verse. We're not going to go into great detail regarding all of these verses. Again, we're just focusing on this idea of this tragic comedy, and we'll point this out as we move along, but at least to get the gist of what's going on, let's go ahead and begin reading at verse 26. "Now as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon a Cyrenian, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus." This may have been done in more than one way, but typically that which was carried by the victim of crucifixion to the place of crucifixion would have been the cross beam and the horizontal beam. Yeah, horizontal. And so it is likely that's what they compelled Simon to carry for Jesus. But it says that a great multitude of the people followed him, the people being the Jews, and women who also mourned and lamented him. And there's a question here. Are these the typical hired mourners that are so prevalent in this particular culture? Or are these those actual followers of Jesus, the women who loved him and followed him? It may have been a combination of both, but Jesus turns to them according to verse 28 and says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren, wombs that never bore, and breasts which never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and the hills cover us. For if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry?" That is, there is coming an occasion when true justice, true vindication from God will come. If they're doing this to me now, one who is not fit for the sacrifice, green wood is not to be burned, what's going to happen to those that are worthy, who are worthy of justice? He's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, something that he has talked about repeatedly up to this point. So he is telling them, don't weep and mourn for me. Tragedy is coming after you. There were also 2 other criminals led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left. I want to go and stop here for just a moment and say a couple of things. Notice that Luke does not spend a lot of time at all talking about what crucifixion is, does he? In fact, neither do the other gospel writers. None of them do. Now, is that because it's no big deal? Is that because it doesn't really matter? That's most likely not the case. Remember that these were all written in a historical and geographical and cultural context. The individuals who would have read these accounts initially knew very well what crucifixion was. They were very familiar with it. There had been thousands crucified before Jesus, and there would be thousands crucified after him. In the grand scheme of things, as far as humanity is concerned, there is nothing special about the crucifixion of Jesus. Don't take that as blasphemy. I'm saying as far as the human perspective, he's just another victim of a very common form of execution. That's it. That's it. We know that there's more to it than that, but this is a common thing. In fact, if you remember a while back when we were talking about one of the predictions, one of the times when Jesus stated that the city was going to be destroyed, we made reference to some historical accounts that tell us that the hills around Jerusalem were barren, really during and following the siege of Jerusalem, a great deal of which was due in part to the fact that the trees were cut down to crucify Jews. See, in cities that had revolted against the Roman Empire, Rome would openly crucify those that had revolted. It made a lesson from them. Don't do what they did or this will happen to you. And so the streets outside of Jerusalem during that siege, individuals that tried to escape, individuals that were caught who were revolting against Rome, they were crucified. Again, to the point that there was no timber around the city of Jerusalem. That many people would be crucified. So Luke does not spend a lot of time regarding this because people were very familiar with it. They're familiar with it at this point and in the past, and they would see it, again, as he is telling them to weep and mourn for themselves, they would see it before too long in great abundance. We won't go into all the details because we have often talked about crucifixion and just how terrible it is. People did not survive crucifixion. They didn't. That's why later you will see the Romans coming, the soldiers coming, and either breaking the legs so as to hasten death. They would not be able to push up on the cross or pull up with their wrists and their hands in order to breathe properly. They would suffocate to death. And they would, or, as they did with Jesus, they would thrust a spear into the side, piercing the heart in just the right place to require or to result in blood and water flowing forth. One person made the observation that these are soldiers. They are well trained in the use of spears or lances. They know exactly where and how to pierce to get the job done. No one survived crucifixion. And also, without exception, there would be beatings and scourgings ahead of time. And Jesus endured those things. In fact, that's why Pilate really did that. He was hoping that by scourging Jesus, which would involve whipping him, remember, with these leather straps, and tied to those individual straps would be pieces of bone or rock. It would cut through the skin and the muscle, the ligaments. Someone has stated that probably the shoulders of Jesus looked like white caps on an ocean of blood. You would be able to see his shoulder blades laid bare, most likely. That's what happened with the events leading up to crucifixion, and then all of those things that happened when one was crucified. So Luke doesn't go into a lot of detail. They know exactly what this means. Theophilus, especially being, if it's the case that he was a Roman proconsul, he knows the justice system and what executions are and what they consist of. All right, so they crucify on either side of him these criminals. But let's go ahead. I was going to read through it and then come back and then talk about the comedic portion of the text. But let's go ahead and start here because this is really where it starts. Actually, it starts even further back than this. But here is something that takes place. How often have you ever considered this? Remember when Jesus did tell his disciples that he was going to be going to Jerusalem and there he was going to be executed? The first thing that they wanted to know was who was going to be on his right hand and who was going to be on his left when he came into his kingdom. Look at the screen. Do you remember what they put above his head? An inscription. Do it. All right, so verse 34 says that Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." And they divided his garments and cast lots. And the people stood looking on, but even the rulers with them. Pilate sends him to Herod when he learns that he is a Galilean, and that's a part of Herod's jurisdiction. So he sends him to Herod and hoping to get rid of him, and he doesn't, because he doesn't want anything to do with this. But it says that now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. That's kind of a clue right there. Herod wanted to be entertained by him. Do your tricks. He's treating him as if he were a court jester. Do some tricks for me. Then he questioned him with many words, but he, Jesus, answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. Why would they do that? Because the whole joke here is, this is a king? This is a king? Listen, this is why Pilate was minded to let him go. This is no king. Remember that treason, revolting against Rome, rebelling against Caesar, was a crime punishable, worthy of death. Pilate wants to let him go. Why? He's no king. Look at him. He's no threat. Look at him. Listen to him. This is a joke. So Herod and his men of war begin to participate in the comedy. Let's put a robe on him. Let's put a robe on the king. And maybe some of this is done out of boredom, but the fact is it's done. And one thing that I want us to keep in mind as we're looking at the scene before us, I want us to keep in mind that it is true that this is very strange, to say the least. I mean, really, this man is a king? I mean, has anybody ever seen or heard of a king like this at all? One of the things that I've been emphasizing probably for the past year, something that just continues to stand out to me in my studies, is that the Bible and God, the author of it, speaks to us in ways and commands us in ways and demonstrates His power to us in ways that are absolutely counterintuitive. As far as human reasoning is concerned, it makes no sense. And you think about some of the teachings of this king, right? If you want to save your life, you have to crucify yourself. You have to die to self. If you want to be great, you have to be a servant. It doesn't make any sense. And I would say that especially in regards to a Roman-ruled world. The mindset of this culture is strength and power, work, fortitude, courage. Again, what kind of king is this? He's no threat. What do they end up doing with his clothes? The only property he has on earth are the clothes on his back. Think about that. The only property he has will now be stripped off of him. It will be stolen from him. And at least one portion of it will be gambled for. They'll make a game out of that. Again, what kind of king is that? What kind of king goes about getting himself crucified when he proclaims that he can save the world and that he's going to save the world? All right. So, the purple robe. Do tricks for us. This is, again, a big joke to them. So they divided, again, back to 23, verse 34, they divided his garments and cast lots. Verse 35, and the people stood looking on, but even the rulers with them again sneered. He saved others, let him save himself. He can't do it. He can't do it. He's a fraud. And they're laughing. They're laughing. All right, now let's go on down to verse 39, though. One of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him. So again, we have on either side, we have the king in the middle with this inscription above his head, "This is the King of the Jews." And you remember that the Jewish leaders wanted it reworded, didn't they? Don't put that above his head. Say that that's what he was saying. He said that he was the king of the... And Pilate said what? I've written what I've written. Listen, they had backed Pilate into a corner. They had somewhat mocked Pilate. Maybe this was a little bit of his getting back at them. I've written what I've written. This is your king. So he mocks them and really mocks him at the same time. This is, look at it, this is your king. And then on either side of him are these criminals. Talk about what they said in a moment, but what kind of court does this king have? Others who should be in positions very close to his. So on his right hand and on his left, we have his court. Do you see the mockery even in the crucifixion itself, even in this arrangement? He's in the center. He is on his throne, so to speak, and these are sitting beside him. It's a comedy in their minds. Laughable. All right, so what about these individuals on both sides? One of them did what? Blasphemed him. He's participating also. He's participating also. If you are the Christ, save yourself and us. Listen, this is not him asking for him to do it, because we see this in the response of the other, right? This criminal doesn't think that he can. He's participating in the mockery, isn't he? He also thinks this is a joke. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, "Do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." How did he know this, by the way? Perhaps at some point he finally figures out, this is Jesus. Remember that the fame of Jesus had gone all around Judea. I mean, all of Judea went out to be baptized of John, right? This man realizes who he is because he had participated in the mockery. Now something's different. He realizes who he is crucified beside. He's done nothing wrong. And he said to Jesus, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." One individual mocks the idea of his being king. What does the other do? He acknowledges that he is. You are the king. You are him. And Jesus said to him, "Assuredly, I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise." Today you will be with me in paradise. His request will be granted. Now it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. Then the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. Stop for just a moment. One thing that I did fail to point out, if you go back up, it says in verse 36 that the soldiers also mocked him, coming and offering him sour wine. The king is thirsty. Let us give him some wine. This is a part of the mockery, right? But now back to verse 47. So when the centurion saw what had happened. So here is the individual over these others who are participating, and perhaps even he did, participating in this making of a comedy out of this tragedy. It says that when he saw what had happened, he glorified God, saying, "Certainly this was a righteous man." Greg pointed out not long to me, pulled me aside not long ago and said that notice that the centurion didn't quite get it right. And I love this. It's subtle, but Greg caught it. I had not noticed it before. He's speaking in the past tense, isn't he? This was a righteous man. As far as the centurion is concerned, when Jesus died, it was done. He was. But we know the rest of the story, right? This did not bring his existence or his reign or his power to an end. And the whole crowd who came together to that sight, seeing what had been done, beat their breasts and returned. The comedy has come to a close. The show is over. They're going to go home. But all his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. They see it all play out. I think looking back over this scenario that so many different people tried to make into a comedy, we have a number of individuals who are either unwilling or unconcerned participants. You think about Simon of Cyrene, compelled him to carry the cross. I mean, he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time or the right place at the right time, whatever it was. He wasn't there to see the show, was he? It's not why he had come to Jerusalem. And he's dragged into this thing. You ever go visit somebody and they're watching television and you want to visit with them, but they are zoned in on the TV and you're now forced to watch this show that you had you didn't want anything to do with it, you don't care anything about it. Okay, I'll wait. Kind of think of Simon like that. And there were some that did see this as tragic, whether we're talking about those women that were lamenting and mourning, or whether we're talking about his acquaintances and the women who followed him. They see it for what it is. It is a tragedy. It is a tragedy. So this is your king, huh? Actually, it is. It is. He is my king. And he is your king if you have submitted yourself to him. As he submits himself to this embarrassing form of execution, as he has become a man, as God has put on flesh, as Paul would say in Philippians 2, as he suffers death and even the death of the cross. I would hasten to remind you that the pictures that we often see of him on the cross are not completely accurate. I don't think that there was a loincloth. This is embarrassing. It is shameful. Not only is it painful, it is shameful. And he is my king. And I will bow before him, and I will proclaim to the world that he is so. In his meekness, he is majestic. In his humility, he is powerful. In his death, he is victorious. He takes your sin and my sin. Should have been you hanging on the cross. It should have been me. But our King took our place. This is no laughing matter. It is tragic, but it is also worthy of celebration. And what he was willing to do. If you're here tonight and you have not yet become a subject of his, surrendering yourself to Him through baptism for the remission of sins, you have the opportunity. Will you bow before Him? Will you follow Him? Will you proclaim to the world that this is your King? Come forward while we stand and sing.
I heard the Savior say, "Thy strength indeed is small. Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. Jesus, take it all to Him I owe. Sin hath left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow. For now indeed I find Thy power and Thine alone can change the leper's spots and melt the heart of stone. Jesus paid it all to Him I owe. Sin hath left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow. And when before the throne I stand in Him complete, I'll lay my trophies down, all down at Jesus' feet. Jesus paid it all to Him I owe. Sin hath left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow. Please be seated. The Lord's Supper has been prepared for those who did not get to partake today. If you don't mind, come forward. You can sit on the front pew, and if you can't, raise your hand and we can serve you where you sit. In preparation for that, we will sing a couple verses of 383. 383. Jesus, keep near the cross, there a precious fountain, free to all the credence stream, those from Calvary's mountain, near the cross, near the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Near the cross, O Lamb of God, brings its scenes before me. Help me walk from day to day with its shadow o'er me. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river.
I'll be reading from 1 Corinthians 11, verses 23 through 26. 1 Corinthians 11, 23 through 26. For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night when he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he also took the cup after supper, saying, "The cup is the new covenant